Hi there. I'm just giving it a couple minutes to get everyone in here, and then we'll get started in a minute. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and hear me and see me. Not that you need to see me, but you need to see the screen. Great, thank you. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. I think given that I am in Boston and not Austin, I think that it'll probably be a relatively small group, so I don't imagine this will take the full hour, and I'd love to just spend some time at the end with Q&A for any questions that I can answer about our experience here. But I am Lauren Palumbo. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Lovin Spoonfuls Food Rescue. We are, as I said, based up here in Boston, so a little bit further away and a little bit colder and a little bit snowier than I imagine it is where all of you are. But I am here today just to sort of share the stories that we've experienced over the past year as we have been going through COVID, and how our program and how our team have responded and what we've done both internally and externally. I think to start by framing the problem is really important. It can't be overstated just the effect that COVID has had on food insecurity. But specifically, we know that pre-COVID, the data was showing us that about 37 million Americans were food insecure, and the estimated numbers now are closer to 50 million. So we're looking at a more than 30% increase in that number overall. What's pretty alarming, and I'm sure every state has seen just such a significant increase in their food insecurity rates, but Massachusetts experienced the highest increase in percentage in food insecurity in the nation, which is alarming for any number of reasons. But here in Massachusetts, we generally fall a little below the national number. We're a smaller population, and we've generally done well to be fairly well resourced, but we really saw a near doubling of our food insecurity rate over the past year because of COVID. We also saw the highest increase in childhood food insecurity in one county in Massachusetts. So we are ranking at the top of the list, and for all the wrong reasons. And simultaneously, the work that we do at Lovin Spoonfuls as a food recovery and a food rescue organization is really focused first and foremost on food waste and trying to prevent that from happening and prevent that food from being lost in the system. So for anyone, I think some of these stats are pretty well known at this point, but I always kind of like to frame the problem and help folks understand that right now we're wasting about 40% of our food in this country. And if we reduced the amount of food loss that we have by about a third, we would actually have enough to feed the 50 million people that are food insecure right now. So it's not even a question of having to wipe out food waste. We're not talking about some giant challenge that is impossible to do. There is a large amount of capturable food that exists in the food system and can be used to feed people. And when that works, it works well, and it helps ensure that resources are put to use and not wasted. All told, food waste is estimated to be about a $218 billion retail value annually. And it's not just about the financial cost and just the general, misfortune of wasting good food. It's that there's an environmental component as well. When we waste food, we are sending it more often than not to landfills, where because of the way that it digests it emits methane, and it becomes the number 3 producer of greenhouse gases globally. So you've basically got the US and China, and then food waste. And so for a variety of reasons, this is a multifaceted problem that a solution solves a number of potential issues. So a little bit about us, since I'm sure not many of you are familiar with Lovin Spoonfuls. We are just about an 11-year-old organization. We are a traditional 501c3 nonprofit, and we were founded really in response to those two issues, right? There's all these people that need access to food, and there is all this food that gets wasted. So what can we do to connect those two things? And so we are effectively a logistics company, but what we do is we use refrigerated trucks to move fresh, healthy food from grocery stores and big box stores and produce wholesalers, and then we redistribute it to more than 160 social service agencies throughout Massachusetts that are using that food to feed people in need. We're really working to sort of bridge that gap that exists between that excess food and the folks who need it. And right now we're rescuing in an average week about 85,000 pounds or up to over 100,000 pounds of food, and then delivering that to those agencies who are serving more than 32,000 people each week. At a glance, we are closing in on having rescued nearly 20 million pounds of food at this point. And again, that's over the past 11 years. In turn, that means that we have been able to provide more than 15.3 million meals of food during our 11 years of service. And this is what our model looks like. For those of you familiar with food rescue, with food recovery, there are a variety of solutions out there. So this is ours. It's one that we are really proud of, and one that we're happy to share here today. We utilize a system of direct distribution. So when you think about a food bank and having a large physical structure where you can store food and move food around and then redistribute it back out onto trucks, we don't do that. I'm speaking to you today from a small office in Boston, which is just where we park the majority of our trucks, but no food actually moves through this building. So what we do is we send a fleet of trucks from a few different regions out into the road each day, and they start out empty, and they go to about 80 different vendors. And again, our vendors are grocery stores, farms, produce wholesalers, big box stores, all places where food is grown or sold or retailed, and where that excess food exists in the food system that may not otherwise get sold. And so they're going to these stores, these businesses, and picking up food up to 5 days a week. And again, that total is usually north of 85,000 pounds of food each week. They do this on, as I said, 8 trucks or 8 routes. So our routes are each geographically focused. So we have 6 that are sort of in eastern Massachusetts, and then a couple that are in central and western Massachusetts. And each truck has its own very specific region. So it serves a set number of communities. The food stays within the communities that we're picking the food up from. That's intentional. We may have large cities in Massachusetts, but the goal is never to take all of the food from certain communities and bring it back to one place. The trucks that we use are refrigerated, again, because we're not bringing that food back to a warehouse. We need it to stay safe while it's in our possession. And because we focus predominantly on fresher, healthier foods that have that short shelf life and need recovery, it's important that it stay at a safe temperature while it's in our possession. We hire a team of dedicated food rescue coordinators. We currently have 13 staff members in that role. It's usually, we have one person that's dedicated to each route, and they know the partners in and out, and they know their region. And then we have additional team members that support all of the routes on various days of the week, depending on when they're busiest, when they're heaviest, when they need the most support. All of those team members utilize a few different mobile systems on their phones throughout the day. One of which, and one of the most important ones, are mobile inventory tracking systems. So they have an app on their phone that allows them to say, I am at X store and I'm picking up this food and it's going onto this truck. And then likewise, we turn around and do the exact same thing when we distribute that food out to social service agencies. As I said earlier, we work with well over hundreds of organizations, and they are serving about 32,000 people each week in 40 communities across Massachusetts. Just to dig in on that a little bit further, our partner agencies are the nonprofits that we're serving. Many of them look like traditional emergency food sources, things like a food pantry, a soup kitchen, or a meal program. But they're not all traditional. We work with a wide variety of organizations, including after-school programs, Senior centers, that's gotten a little complicated because of COVID, but that is an area that we typically work in. We work with some veterans programs. We work with transitional housing shelters. So kind of a wide spectrum of nonprofit organizations where at the end of the day, they might have a root program that they're working to administer, but if the clients that they're serving don't have access to consistent food sources, they know that their services can only go so far. And so we will meet folks where we can, whether it's a healthcare organization or some other family-oriented programming. If we can provide food to those families accessing those services, we will. So it doesn't just have to look like traditional sort of hunger relief organizations. As I mentioned, we operate across Massachusetts. So we started in Boston 11 years ago with one truck and one person. That wasn't me, to be clear, but that I've been here for about 8 years now. But the team here in Boston has grown. We now have 6 trucks on the road in the Boston area. And then as I said, we've since expanded into a couple other regions. So we operate in sort of just outside of Boston in a series of suburban communities called Metro West. And then we also operate in Western Massachusetts around the city of Springfield. The way that we plan our growth is always regional. So we're always looking at what is sort of the hub of any new route or any new operation, and then how do we grow it out from there. So for instance, in Central Mass, we have the city of Worcester. We're currently prospecting the ability to potentially expand there later this year. But when that happens, the truck would live there. The team members that are hired to work there would live there. We're looking for local partners, local resources, and local talent to ensure that we're getting folks on the ground who have expertise in those communities. We don't ever, as I said, Massachusetts is certainly not as large of a state as Texas, but we do, it does take a couple hours at least to get from one end to the other. And it certainly would not make the most sense for us to be sending trucks back and forth across the state. Not a good use of our resources or our funders' dollars. And so that's sort of what we do. That's what we've been doing for the last, 11 years. And a year ago, as everyone knows, we woke up to the realization that COVID was here and things needed to change. I think working in emergency food systems things moved so quickly and we were so unsure of what was likely to happen next that our focus first, beyond just keeping our trucks on the road and trying to continue to provide food to the agencies that remained open, it was really, how do we keep our teams safe? How do we keep them physically and mentally well in this really challenging time? And in my role as Chief Operating Officer, I oversee our operations management staff, who in turn oversee that team of 13 food rescue coordinators. And they were on the ground in trucks in the backs of grocery stores and making deliveries to food pantries when we didn't know yet how COVID spread, when we didn't know yet what the implications were or what was likely to happen if someone on our team, who were mostly in their 20s and young and healthy, but we didn't know what would happen if they got sick. So, I think sometimes we still don't fully know some answers to those questions, but we know more now than we did then. And so some of the things that we did right away to try and balance the anxieties and the fears of our team members was really be responsive internally and control what we could. So we worked to implement hazard pay. We worked with one of our foundation supporters to receive extra funding to implement a $2 per hour pay increase, which continued basically through the summer. So for almost 6 months, we implemented that while we, tried to determine I'll answer that question in just a second. So we tried to make sure that our team members were compensated for the risk that they were taking and continuing in the role on the road. And the second piece here is yes, we did bring in a food market. So this is actually kind of twofold. So to answer the question, so we don't actually, because our staff is staff, and we try to pay them at a living wage so that they're not needing to access emergency food programs themselves. We don't touch any of the food. We obviously physically touch it. We pick it up, we distribute it, but we don't take any of the food that we recover. We actually have a waiting list of agencies that are looking for food from our distributions. And so to answer the question simply, all of the food that gets recovered is dedicated for those social service agencies. So what we did in turn, and this is multifold. One was we wanted to reduce the need of our staff members to go into stores on their own time, right? They're spending all of their days out on the road, going in and out of grocery stores, and that's anxiety driven enough. So when they get back off the road and they're kind of managing their own lives, how can we make their life simpler and try to reduce risk outside of work? So we worked to purchase food. And part of the reason we did this, we actually worked with one of our partners that's a wholesale distributor. So you have to imagine these wholesale distributors that are built to sell to campuses or universities or hospitals or to restaurants, right? Everyone was shut down. And so our wholesale partners went to, from certain levels of business to a very significant drop. So this was just another way of us to be able to support our community as well. And so what we did is we made, weekly orders from the wholesaler. We brought, their truck here, made a delivery here, and set up basically, a little food market for our team members to come and shop from internally. For our remote staff members, though, because we couldn't, sort of send them groceries, what we did is we sent them gift cards for grocery delivery services so that they could get deliveries to their home and again, stay out of stores. This was just, early on in the pandemic when we just did not know how safe it was to be in and out of places. That was to really address the food piece. On the mental health side, I think it was just so important for all of our team members that we acknowledged the strain, physically and mentally that this pandemic was going to have on our team. And so we cycled through a couple rounds actually of mental health days for all of our staff, not just our staff on the road, but we sort of said, we took a step back and said to everyone, like, you are currently trying to figure out if you can see your family. You're currently trying to figure out what challenges your family is facing. You might be facing challenges at home if your partner, your spouse lost a job because of COVID. You might be dealing with children that are now suddenly home from school, and that's a whole nother ballgame to play with. So we tried to give everyone a couple days sort of spaced out and really kind of mandated that they take days to themselves, paid mental health days outside of their regular PTO or sick time, so that everyone could sort of take that moment and take a step back and figure out what they needed, and then encouraged opportunities for team members to ask for what they might need as well. It was just we're a small team, we're about 25 people, but the wide range of scenarios that we all experienced just with family members and challenges at home as we adapted to COVID, we wanted to provide that space. And then, of course, from a safety perspective, we had to provide PPE. And it was actually really challenging because in the beginning, finding it was very difficult. We sort of reached out to all of our community partners to try and ask them to donate if they had access to gloves or wipes or other resources. We received bulk hand sanitizer donations from distilleries that were then producing hand sanitizer. So obviously accessing those materials has become manageable now, but at the beginning, we really tried to make sure that we could easily supply PPE to all of our staff who were on the road as needed. Next slide. So then there's a couple additional things that we did beyond our staff, sort of external partnerships that really shifted the way that our day-to-day operations looked during at least the first 6 months or so of COVID. And I'll go through these, they're in no particular order, but one of the first things that happened was one of our corporate partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield, is a health insurer here in Massachusetts. They reached out and said, we have this corporate offices, they're closed down, but we have these teams of people that prepare food in a cafeteria, typically when the office is open. If we were to bring them back and prepare meals, would you be able to distribute them? And so we did. We worked with them to distribute about 5,000 meals a week in addition to the food that we were rescuing in our traditional operations. And we would go and pick those meals up Monday through Friday and then distribute them to dedicated partner agencies that were prepared to receive those meals. It was, what you would imagine in sort of like a picnic lunch, if you will, right? It had a sandwich, a drink, a bag of chips, a piece of fruit, a cookie, and so it was ready to go, ready to eat, no reheating necessary, very easy to distribute. We also worked with a local produce wholesaler to distribute some of the Farmers to Families food box programs through the USDA and the CARES Act. And that, again, because we focus on recovery, was sort of outside of our normal realm. This was just straight distribution of additional food. But where the grants came in and these wholesalers had access to provide this food, but then didn't necessarily have access to the agencies that were in the communities to deliver that food, we became the sort of middleman, if you will, to go and pick up those boxes and then distribute them out into community agencies that were able to get them into the hands of families. And then the other thing that happened is that because COVID just disrupted everyone's operations in the nonprofit world in some way, we saw out of our 160, 170 partners, we saw about probably close to a third of them close, at least temporarily, while they tried to determine if they could remain open. Maybe it was because they were a senior center, and so the whole system was, the whole center was shut down given the risk to seniors. Maybe it was a program that ran out of a community center and the city had shut down the community center. Or maybe it was a food pantry that shut down because all of their volunteers were seniors and they couldn't actually run their programming without those volunteers. But we saw a real drop in the number of partners that were open and able to receive food. The flip side of that is that we saw all these nonprofits that typically do nothing to do with food, and they couldn't provide their regular services, right? Whether they were an after-school program that was teaching kids about computers, they couldn't have kids in a computer lab, but they knew they had kids that they used to work with. They were at home and didn't have access to food. And so they were like, well, one way we can help these families in the meantime is get them food. So we had a wide variety of nonprofits that really worked in everything from anti-racism to family programming to education that typically never would have provided food through their programs, but they called us up and said, this is one thing that we can do for the families that we're serving. And so we started a number of temporary partnerships that worked with those agencies while they work to provide food to their families. And then they slowly, some of them still are working with us because they realize this is something that the families will benefit from even after we've brought back our programming in a virtual format. And then some of them have brought back their programming and no longer have capacity to distribute that food. So we've seen a range of solutions there, but we were just fortunate and grateful to be able to work with these community organizations that thought so uniquely about how they could serve the folks that they were serving in some way, and instead of just having to shut down and not be able to help them at all during such a difficult time. And then there are a few systems that we utilize to enable these responses. One of them was just the baseline of added resources. So very quickly, in order to do the Blue Cross Blue Shield meal distribution, in order to distribute the Farmers to Families food boxes, we actually worked with emergency relief funding, and we added a rental truck to our fleet for a few months. So if anyone is in the business of acquiring refrigerated trucks, it takes a few months typically, especially when it's approaching the summertime and folks need to get new trucks on the road. So we just added a rental truck to our fleet for a number of months so that we could have that additional capacity to pick up and distribute that extra food that existed out there to get it into the hands of folks who needed it. We also hired a couple of team members in temp positions. They've since joined the team permanently, but at the time where we didn't know exactly how long these programs would be standing up and how long we'd be able to maintain those positions, we at least created temporary positions to hire some folks that had, lost their roles in other fields. And I'm glad that they're still here, but at the time they were hired as temporary roles. As I mentioned earlier, we use a few technology tools. So one of them being the inventory system that I mentioned. One of the others that we use is a routing system. So that basically is another app that's on our team members' phones that tells them the order of stops for the day. And if they need to contact someone at one of those stops, there's their contact information is in there. They are able to click through to get directions to their next stop. And so that system, it allowed us to kind of consistently be reordering stops and adding new stops to the routes, because in a normal world, our routes are pretty much set for the day, and we know where we're going, when we're going, who we're going to. But with COVID, when agencies started closing so quickly, when other agencies were asking for food, unexpectedly, our team on the back end, our operations management team, was sort of plugging and playing, just stops on each of the routes as quickly as possible, and then communicating that out to the team through this app. So we were able to modify routes on the fly as things were shifting at such a rapid pace. And then over time, as we settled into COVID and it kind of became the new normal, there were certain communities. I mean, as I said early on in the presentation, Massachusetts really saw the highest increase in food insecurity in the country. But there were certain communities where, as is the case in any state, that COVID hit more intensely, whether because of communities of color that were affected, whether it's communities that just had higher rates of job loss because of the industries that are focused there. We had a group of communities that are about north of Boston that we saw hit incredibly hard. And that prompted us to actually put a whole new route on the road, a permanent route. So not one of these rental trucks, not temporary team members, but long-term permanent partnerships with a permanent truck that is now has become our sixth route in the greater Boston area. And, to sort of wind down before we move into questions, honestly, we never would have imagined going into 2020 that we were prepared for what that year would have thrown at us in so many ways. I mean, we do live in the Northeast, so yes, we're prepared to deal with blizzards and we're prepared to deal with storms. But, no one knows that you're prepared to deal with the pandemic. And at the end of it, what we looked back on last year is our trucks stayed on the road every single day that they were supposed to. Our team members stayed healthy, knock on wood. We've been very fortunate in that regard. Our funding community responded because they knew we were working in emergency food programs and knew that the services needed to continue, and we were able to keep doing the work. And I have to say, it was an incredibly humbling year for us in that regard, to be able to continue doing this work at a time when it was so needed. We really were unexpectedly prepared for what the pandemic threw at us. And that was because we had systems and the resources and a flexible approach that allowed us to sort of scale up when we needed to and pull back as things started to settle into the new normal. We last year actually rescued more than 4 million pounds of food, which was a 13% increase over the year prior. And that's just in food recovery. That's separate from the additional programs which we added on because of COVID. And going forward, we now feel like we're ready to maintain this level of work. So as I said, we added a whole new permanent route to our operations, but we are prepared to continue growing. So I mentioned as well that we're looking at expanding into central Massachusetts to the city of Worcester. But what we've learned from the past year is that we're ready to continue responding to the need, and we're grateful for the opportunity to do so. So we've been very, very fortunate, and I'm just been happy to have the opportunity to share the story that we had at Lovin Spoonfuls over the past year with each of you. And I'm happy to answer questions. I'm kind of just a presentation of one as opposed to a panel. So not sure that I needed a full hour, but I would love to answer any questions. So Lisa, I'm just reading, one of the things that we encountered was a heightened need or request for individually packaged and prepared meals and less need for perishable surplus grocery items because it was harder for our partners to distribute to individuals with COVID protocols. Did you all need to adjust this with the surplus food you collected? So yes, so because we work so predominantly with grocery stores, as everyone can imagine, right? Grocery stores over the past, 10, 20 years have gone from just a place where you bought food to a place where you buy meals. So a large portion of what we recover, I didn't maybe dig into this that much, but because we're running refrigerated trucks and we focus on perishable foods that have that short shelf life that need to be recovered, a big segment of what we recover is actually sort of those individually packaged prepared meals that you see, in the prepared food section at your grocery store. And what we try to do with that food, it's definitely at a premium on our trucks. But our team members, when they're on the trucks, they're delivering food to typically around 5 to 8 different organizations each day. And so they're able to really manage the inventory because everything is getting delivered that day. They manage the inventory in a way that allows them to match the food that is the best fit for the agencies that they're going to. So if they're going to a food pantry and a community meal program and a shelter and another food pantry and another meal program, they understand that they're able to prioritize large bulk individual items for the food pantry so that they can make sure, for instance, that like one bunch of bananas is in every bag of food that they distribute to their clients versus those individually packaged prepared meals. We love those for transitional shelters, especially for folks that don't have access to, to a kitchen when you're in a congregate care setting and, you need to be remaining in your room because it's no longer safe to sort of communally cook in the kitchen. So, we definitely see a need. We have seen a need for those pre-COVID. The need definitely did increase with COVID. And I think we try to make sure that we're prioritizing that food for the agencies where we know there is the greatest need for those quick, ready to eat meals. But we do also work with a lot of bulk, whole produce. So we definitely see a lot of fruits and vegetables. We see a lot of proteins. We see a lot of milk, a lot of eggs. So those are items that obviously people will need to cook with. And we try to prioritize those for the agencies that are looking to hand out those whole ingredients. Well, congratulations on your first refrigerated truck. It's a fun life running effectively a trucking company, and hiring the team is one of the best parts of the job here. Honestly, I think we've been very fortunate to have an incredible team that works on the ground doing this work, and it's such a unique role. Our food rescue coordinators are, they're not just driving the truck and moving the food, but they're really maintaining relationships on the road with so many community organizations that are doing incredible work on the ground, and they really are the face of the organization. So I wish you good luck in finding the right person because it's such a unique role and they do incredible work. Are there other questions that I can answer? We did. We did lose some partners during COVID. Just off the top of my head, we had, a child care center that had shut down because of COVID protocols and because of the shutdown, and then lost their lease because their landlord demanded that they continue paying rent. So that was one of the darker moments of the past year. And some of our partners actually still remain closed. So some of them have closed permanently, and they've just know that they will not survive the pandemic. And when that happens, just in general, anytime we lose a partner agency, we really try to make sure that we're rerouting the food by adding a partner in the same community to see if there's a way that we can serve those same individuals that were accessing that food, but in another site. If that's not possible, obviously we sort of go to that waiting list of agencies that are looking for food. But we did have some agencies that had to make the decision to close because they knew they would not make it out of COVID. But then separately, we still have about 24 organizations that remain closed. Again, a lot of them are senior focused. The folks that are, in senior centers are just still not bringing people back, or some of the organizations that just rely entirely on seniors to run, that still are not up and running yet. So we have a number of partners that we hope will continue to come back online, and others that unfortunately will never return. So the next question is around, can you speak to experience partnering with childcare programs or other folks feeding families with young children, and what does that partnership look like? Yes, so we have both some childcare and some after-school programs. And typically the partnerships with those programs is really focused around providing the kids with an after school snack and or meal for the evening that afternoon and evening that they're at those programs when they are physically at the programs. Now it's more about virtual, but generally that's the way that we've operated in the past. And then we also have some family service organizations. So sort of multi-service where, families might be coming for both childcare, KEAT assistance, other programs that agency might offer. And many of those programs tend to just run kind of like an impromptu pantry. They're not your traditional food pantry, but they effectively are running a food pantry. There's one I can think of, there's a YMCA that we work with that they have families that are sort of on the reduced fee structure for the services that they provide, and they know that accessing food can be a challenge for those families. And so they started just asking, if we had food, would that be helpful for you? And we deliver food to the YMCA, and when families are picking up or dropping off their kids, they're able to take that food home. We work with a Boys and Girls Club as well that is very similar, where they'll basically have a section set out where they offer food to the families that come in, and it's kind of like there's no questions asked. It's not, again, it's not a traditional food pantry where you're looking for, any sort of screening questions or any sort of, eligibility criteria. It's, if you're having difficulty accessing food, the food is here and that's available to you. And it's really about providing additional services where folks are. I think what we've learned in the hunger relief space over the last, number of years is that we have to meet families where they are. We can no longer assume that folks have time in their schedules to drive to a food pantry and, wait in line for that food to be available to them. We need to think about where folks are in the community and where can we get food to them. So whether that's, food pantries moving their distribution site to housing development as opposed to somewhere across town that is not accessible to those families. We have a community that we work with nearby that there's a large food pantry in town, but it's really hard for where all the senior housing is for those folks to get there on public transit, just the way the public transit lines work. And so a separate program was started on the other side of town to meet seniors closer to their homes where they could walk and access that food. So it's really, for us, that's part of the reason why we're grateful to be able to have the flexibility to work with so many different programs and to not be focused only on traditional hunger relief or traditional emergency food programs. It's given us the ability to really meet these agencies where they are and help them serve their clients. Trying to think if there's anything else of relevance that would be worth sharing. I'm also happy to grant everyone, 15 minutes to go pop into another session. But yes, the Chelsea Collaborative, yeah. So they are an organization that we work with, yes. So they're just north of Boston, and we that's actually sort of the community that our newer route. One of the communities that our newer route is centered around. It's around if anyone's familiar with north of Boston, there's the cities of Everett, Revere, Chelsea, Lynn, towns that certainly have been devastated by COVID, and the Chelsea Collaborative is one of our partners in that region. I'm also putting up the last slide of my presentation, which just has some nice photos of team members, but also has our website and all of our social media handles, as well as my email address. It's a long one. It's lauren@lovinspoonfulsinc.org, but don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions following today's session. I'll stay here and continue to answer questions. I'm not going anywhere, but certainly understand if folks want to pop into other sessions. Thank you, Rita. I appreciate that. Yeah, we do hope to, eventually expand beyond Massachusetts. We admittedly are a Massachusetts born and bred organization. So we have, our leadership team was all born and raised here, and our focus right now is on solving some of these issues here in Massachusetts, where we have whole communities that don't have food recovery just yet. We'd like to expand statewide, but it is absolutely a model that can be adapted and implemented anywhere. That's one of the things that I think the last 10 years has taught us, that this is not something that requires an urban setting. We have routes that operate in suburban and almost rural communities as well. The thing is there's grocery stores, there's food being wasted, there's produce wholesalers, there's food that's being wasted, and there's farms, there's excess food being harvested. So what we see is that, if you have food available, it can be recovered. And as we know, hunger permeates every single community in America, and that is not something that is escapable. So. Yes, I do believe that the organization I'm thinking of in Austin is Keep Austin Fed. I'm not sure if that's who you're talking about, Lisa, but certainly I'm familiar a little bit with them. Oh, that's you. Hello. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. Thank you for attending. So thanks again to everyone that attended. I'm happy to answer any further questions, but I know we wrapped up a tiny bit early since it's just me. But if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat and I'll certainly answer anything that I can. There for anyone that just joined. We wrapped up a little bit early, but if there are questions that I can answer, just let me know. thought of a follow-up on my childcare program question. How is it funded? Do you use your fundraising dollars for this program? So we actually, that's a good question. And I guess something that I left out. So we actually don't get paid for the food that we deliver. So the way that we are funded, we receive funding, and as a traditional nonprofit, right, through grants, foundations, individual donors, fundraising events, which are now, of course, all virtual. And so we offer our services generally at no charge on either end of the spectrum. So we don't charge the vendors to pick up from them. Many of them do support us philanthropically. So you could say that there's a relationship there that happens. But on the agency side, we deliver the food at no cost to the beneficiaries that we serve, to the agencies that we deliver to. So really for us, one of the benefits of working with some of these childcare programs is that, especially when you're in a nonprofit setting, especially if your focus is childcare or your focus is education or your focus is healthcare or recovery, your main focus, you want to invest as many of your dollars into that essential programming. So then having to provide food is another line item that sort of takes away from your ability to provide your main services. So for us, we find it really wonderful that we're able to provide that food and hopefully help them to redirect some of their funding back to their main programming. So for instance, if it's a childcare program, it means that they can buy more books or art supplies for the kids that they're working with, as opposed to spending it on providing snacks in the afternoon. For those that do support or do receive federal funding, because either they're one of the programs that is providing the federally subsidized programs, they're not able to receive the food from us for those meals that are required through the federally subsidized programs, but they'll use the food that we provide again, either to supplement. Exactly. So they'll prioritize that funding for the meals that they have to provide through the programming, and then the food that we provide can help supplement those meals, or it can help to, again, provide food that the families can take home, if that's the case that they work with them that way. So, we try to be as flexible as possible. There's very few settings where we feel like the food we deliver can't be put to use. It really just comes down to whether or not the agency, is willing to sort of work with us and think through a way to put this food to use. But we have a large number of agencies to support, so we're able to find ways. So, yeah, thank you for the question. And I think we're going to get yanked back to the center stage in a moment. So it was lovely to meet you all and chat with you. I know we had a little bit of downtime there, but good to hear that not everyone is in Texas. So thank you. San Francisco is a city close to my heart. So I'm glad to make the connection.